Okay, at this time we would ask those in the back to please join us. We're ready to start our meeting. Please pray with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this church and what it means to all of us. We ask that you bless these proceedings, be with us during each of the communications, each of the impact teams, and we ask that what we say today will be pleasing in your sight. Pray this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Now I would like to invite Barb to review the minutes of our last congregational meeting.
Hi guys. I will summarize because they are 3 pages long. Elder Amy Heyer opened the meeting in prayer at 12:30 p.m. and it was held in person here as well as on Zoom back in the day. Those elders present formed a quorum, and they were Amy, Ed Hogarty, Todd Hutchison, and Brian Linscott. And there were 32 covenant partners here in the church, as well as online. So I got to read the 2021 annual meeting minutes, and those were approved. There were annual reports from our leaders, and then there were questions. And I'll just touch on a couple. Isabel, hi Isabel. She said, what about the snack pack? Are they still using the building? And Pastor said no. Adriana asked if we had a professional rat remover yet in our sites. And she complimented Todd for, sneaking around the basement and trying to get the rats removed all on his own. Nick Myrick asked if there were any anticipated facility expenses. And Pastor Aaron said, you know what, that parking lot, which you guys all look at all year, it needs to be resurfaced, and it still does. Then there was a ballot, an election for church leadership for elders and deacons. And at that time, there were no elders on the ballot. There was no one that the nominating committee had found. And there was one deacon, and that was Bridget Collins. Yay, Bridget. So Pat Heyer nominated Isabel Heyer, those hires, to be an elder, and she accepted that. After that, John Furtaka said, do people on the nominating committee all need to be covenant partners, or could they just arrive? And Pastor said, no, they do need to be covenant partners. And that's important for all of us today, as we'll be looking for folks to serve on the new nominating committee. At that moment, myself, Janice Myrick, and John Forsyth volunteered to serve on the 2022 nominating committee. Page 1. There's more. Then paper ballots were distributed, and there was an online ballot sent to the partners online. And Jenny, who's not here today, they weren't able to be here, just did such a good job, I have to say, because it was pretty tricky to figure out who were the covenant partners who were visiting with us online, and then to get them counted. And she had to send 2 ballots, because one was for the elder deacon decision and one was for who will be a church trustee, and she did that. And I am not going to tell you the vote count, but indeed we elected Isabel and Bridget. At that moment, they let the pastor sneak away while we discussed his salary. There was a motion to approve Pastor Aaron's salary compensation package, which included a $3,051 increase, and that was adopted. After Pastor Aaron came back to the meeting, Brian Linscott, our treasurer, continued to review the 2022 budget line items, and he asked for questions, and there were a few. In brief, There was a question about the new Washington State CARES Act, and Brian replied that Pastor, as well as Jenny, our secretary, our church secretary, had declined to participate in the proposed program. But apparently that act's implementation was delayed, so there was no immediate action to be taken regardless. Bob asked whether or not the Deacons Fund was included in the budget. Brian said that's on the balance sheet. You are not going to find it in the annual budget. So you have, I believe, a copy of the budget, and if anyone would like back copies of the income statement, the balance sheet, or the budget to actual reports, all that can be given to you. Then there was a short question about using PushPay, which you probably recall is the online donation application app that the church used for several years. So it's pretty expensive. And you'll hear more about that, I think, in the updates to come. Dick Andrews, this is so like him. He said, "Brian, are you training a successor? Have you got a leader in mind to lead when you are strolling out?" Brian said not at that moment, but he would like volunteers. So we'll find out if anyone leapt upon that. There was a motion to close the meeting at 1:45 p.m., which passed. Following that, there was an annual corporation meeting, which is meant to be about 2 minutes long, and I think it was. It opened at 1:50 p.m. in prayer by Elder Amy Heyer. Those same elders were present. There was a motion to accept the annual corporation meeting minutes from 2021, approved, to elect Isabel a trustee, should she be elected as elder. They were still in the back counting the ballots at that moment. And that passed. The meeting was then adjourned. And Todd closed our meeting in prayer at 1:55 p.m. Thanks so much.
Do we have a second to approve the minutes as written? Second. All those in favor of approving the minutes as written say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Nick Myrick, for making that motion, and Haley for seconding the motion. So next on our agenda is to review the printed reports, and the way in which we're going to kind of do this is I'm going to initially consistently ask if either the author or who wrote the report has any statements to make, and then I'm going to ask for any questions, and then we will move to the next category. So first report is the pastor's report. I don't have any statements. Any questions related to the pastor's report? No. Sweet. Nominating impact team. I don't think I have any statements for that either. Any questions related to nominating impact team? Actually, I guess my statement that we will hit in just a moment is nominating impact team is going to be presenting Donna Andrews as a selection for elder and John Furtakas as a selection for deacon when we get to that section. But any other questions related to that? No. Okay. Anything that we want to highlight in the clerk's report? No? Any questions related to the clerk's report? No? Wonderful. Finance impact team. Of note, we were negative 5,000, roughly. Any questions? Yeah. No. No. She just noted that we prayed through the COVID restrictions, that some of them did persist through 2020 or sections of 2022. There are no new additional ones. Brian, did you want to say anything related to the finance? Nope. Any questions related to the finance impact team report? No. Todd, did you want to say anything related to facilities? No, nothing here. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Just a correction.
Yeah.
It wasn't my donation. It was
Oh,
the church's credit card used for this.
that is correct.
For the lower purpose.
Where are you at, Brian?
This is the next to the last paragraph of the facilities report. It says, thank you, Brian, for donating your air miles. It's actually a church's credit card.
Oh, I think,
I mean, you're welcome, but it wasn't my personal air miles.
I think the most recent copy fixed that.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
I think it said she's already printed.
Okay. Yeah. The most. So if you got it from at least the top of the pile, it reads: At Brian Linscott's suggestion, we used accumulated church air miles to purchase a new push mower. Okay. Sweet. Worship Impact Team. Micah, do you have anything you would like to say? Nope. Any questions? Nope. Youth ministry. Haley, anything that you?
Just be praying because it sounds like we potentially have some big changes coming up. So just pray that God's will be done.
Okay. Has some big changes. Any questions related to youth ministry? No. Missions team. Amy or anyone on the missions, anything that you want to particularly highlight or state?
Nothing for me.
Great. Any questions related to missions impact team? No. Sweet. Oh. So that's the third bullet point?
I went back and forth because I found the name in two different ways. And then I went online. And then I thought it had two L's online, but maybe I missed it. I don't know, it's back and forth because I went and found different places where it was written.
So I.
I'll check.
Yep, I will just note check spelling. Great. Ed is at a business meeting right now. Any questions related to the Making Disciples Impact Team?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
During the 3 years that we've done the Making Disciples, this last year in over, he really stepped up. Not because he's an elder, but because he gets it. He gets the Great Commission, and in his heart, and when he joined me as a co-leader, it spoke well for the future. But Ed gets it. So
Man.
we're combining and looking at ways to increase the making of disciples so that it becomes very deep part of our DNA and deep part of the churches that we interact with.
Amen. Any other questions related to Making Disciples Impact Team? Nope. I have no statements related to the Men's Fellowship. Any questions related to Men's Fellowship? Any statements or questions related to Women's Ministry? And I think the next ones are all pretty much under that heading. Amy or other deacons, any statements related to the deacons report?
No, it's pretty thorough.
Okay. Any questions related to the deacons report? No. Sweet. Awesome. So that is reviewing our printed reports. So, as I mentioned for nominating committee, the nominating committee gathered together in kind of the back half of the year. I think we started in August, and we met numerous times and prayed over the congregation and who God is calling to serve as an elected officer during this time. And as I'm saying this, John, were you supposed to do this part?
As you're saying that, I realized I offered so you wouldn't have to, and then I forgot.
Okay, we're good in either direction. No, it's fine. Yeah, we gathered together in August. We met several times throughout the year in prayerful consideration over who God is calling to serve as an elder or as a deacon. Donna Andrews accepted a nomination as an elder, and John Furtakis accepted a nomination as a deacon. I do need to ask if there are any nominations from the floor for either of those positions. No? Awesome. So now I believe Danny and Barb are going to hand out the ballots along with the pencils by which you are able to vote on those positions.
And if you'd let us know if you're not a covenant partner, just
Correct. Correct. Thank you, Barb. One thing that does have to be stated, although we're not holding a particularly closed congregational meeting, the only people who are able to vote for these positions are covenant partners. And so we ask that if you're not a covenant partner of FTPC, please just refuse the ballot or don't turn it in. Yeah. And as you are receiving that, I also want to give you time and space to begin thinking of if you might be willing to serve as a nominating committee member. The elders select among themselves one elder representative. The deacons select among themselves one deacon representative. And we ask for 3 representatives from the congregation at large. So if you're part of the congregation of Foster Tukwila Presbyterian Church and are not currently serving as an elder or as a deacon, then I invite you to consider if you might be called to serve as a nominating committee member. And I'll give just a couple moments to consider that and for the ballots to be passed before we. And I should also say, if you are with us online, if you are with us online and you're a covenant partner, Jenny should be sending you a way to vote. I don't think it's right now, but definitely by Tuesday, you should receive a way to vote as well. One person, one vote. Correct. One covenant partner, yes. So if by some way you are here currently present and you receive an online invitation to vote, which is possible, if you voted in person, please do not also vote online. At least for this initial round of voting. Second question, Ben.
Did we have a time for possible nominations on the floor?
I did ask. Yes. Did we have a nomination from the floor? No. Okay. Yes, I did ask.
and on nominating committee, are they going to handwrite those in?
Yeah. And so my next question, I'm going to give just a couple more moments for any elder and or deacon writing nominations and or voting. And as I asked, we do need 3, or we ideally would ask for 3 members of 3 people to serve on our nominating committee from the congregation at large, meaning not currently serving as an officer of the church. Would anyone be willing to do that? Connie would be willing. anyone else? Thank you, Connie. Okay. And Haley would be willing. Thank you, Haley.
Michael. What's it? Michael. A-E-L.
Oh, that was Haley, not me.
Haley. Haley Michael.
Spelled like Callie.
I think Ben will write it, probably. And the reason why it should be 2 L's. And the reason why we are writing it on the screen, if you did not already know, is if you have a ballot, we ask that you write them in as write-in candidates so that you are able to vote accordingly. Any other nominations to serve on nominated committee, or anyone else who might be willing to serve in that position? And Micah would be willing. Awesome. Micah Linscott. So that is the number of nominations that we're asking for. So again, I invite you to, if you're not already doing so, write those names down on your ballot and vote accordingly. It is true. If anyone else would like to be nominated, you could throw your hat in, and it would be a different sort of voting process. All right. So moving on to the budget, one thing we're gonna wait to collect them.
Do we need a motion to close nominations?
Oh, I think you are correct.
Close nominations.
Okay. Do we have a second? All those in favor of closing nominations, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Micah. So we are doing the voting a little bit differently in that what we're going to do is, last year we tried to separate the election of elders from who is placed as trustee. And the reason for that is because to some degree you can't elect a trustee who hasn't yet been elected as an elder, and by definition, your elder always, by definition, the person you're selecting as trustee always became an elder today, basically. But what we're going to do is the kind of the way out of that, or the way out of that, or the way through that also, is that we can elect our trustee pending election as elder, meaning it's only valid if that person is selected as elder. In this case, the person would be Donna. Did someone have a question with what I just said? No, okay. And for that reason, I'm going to ask you to hold on to your ballot. Okay. Because we're going to do that part later, and then we also have the easement vote that also should be on your ballot later. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you to hold on to your ballot until the end of the whole meeting, and actually the end of the next meeting. Otherwise, we'd have 3 ballots running. Okay, so other thing that is a little bit different was Barb helpfully noted on our last annual congregational meeting, we had asked if Brian had anyone who might be willing to do sections of his job, if anyone was being trained to be his replacement. And while I don't believe we found that person yet, we did have one small wrinkle in that Brian got to be less involved in the budget process than he's been previously. So that's one transition. And what that means is I will do most of the review of the budget other than, obviously, the pastoral expenses section. So I'm going to invite Brian up to talk about the pastoral expenses section. I'm going to leave during that section, and the other elders who were part of that discussion are able to discuss with you. And then I'm going to come back and I will do the rest of the budget section. So.
I was so uninvolved in the budget process to the point that if there's any questions, it's actually going to need to be answered by any elders that are present. But I believe the main difference in the salary for Aaron this year is that he just moved some of the items around, like the education books 60/70 was reduced quite a bit, and that amount was put up into his compensation. The effect of that is really that he's going to have to pay a little bit more in taxes, but in reality, he doesn't always use that category, and so if he doesn't use it, he loses it. So he's actually getting a little bit more money in his pocket this year, but he'll pay a little more taxes on that money that he's getting. Does that make sense? As far as, because the way the the education books and mileage reimbursement, those types of things are treated tax-wise is it's outside of his income and it's just a reimbursement. So it doesn't count towards taxes, but because he hasn't been using that, he hasn't actually been getting that money. So this way he gets the money but pays more taxes. Any questions on that? Did I make that completely confusing? So anyway, does anybody have any questions for the elders as far as basically his salary stays the same this year, but the money's moved around, so he gets a little bit more in his pocket. So, any questions? If there's no questions, do I have a motion to accept? Second. Okay, it's been moved.
And the second, please?
Kathy seconded.
Okay, it's great if you wait your arm.
Moved and accepted to vote on pastor's salary as it is written. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Aaron may come back in. And so, yes, as he noted, Dick, I still haven't found a replacement. Anybody volunteering today? My wife says when I retire from work, I can retire. What's that? I'll have more time. Yeah, I said, John, that's totally wrong. Aaron, welcome back to being a pastor for another year. It's awesome. Yay.
So, thank you, first of all. So really broadly, as we went through our budget, and I think I wrote this in one of the reports, we were negative for the second time. Great news is last summer we came to you and we said we were like negative $15,000. That wasn't the end of year result. And so we are very, very thankful for that, and bless you all for that. But also we are negative $5,000, and that's not ideal. And so kind of as Session was working through the budget, one real consideration we kind of had was we needed to make cuts where they were possible. As you look through our budget, though, actually a lot of it is pretty static without making like harder decisions. Meaning like salary is pretty static unless you want to do something with that. Our missions is pegged as a percentage of our budget, so that just kind of is what it is. And then things like building expenses also just they are. Our power bill doesn't necessarily fluctuate too much, other than our ability to like turn off power. But none of that's none of that's discretionary spending. So, as session gathered together, we made a number of recommendations, and we'll just kind of go over the sections where possible. So salary expenses, we had voted to leave the salaries as they were. A lot of years we will have a cost of living increase, and we really appreciate being able to do that. But again, in the second year of being negative $5,000, that didn't seem feasible for us. So that was kind of where that was left. In capital equipment, we didn't foresee any like well-sized capital expenditures being made this year, and so we cut there. I should say, should have said this earlier. One of the other reasons for cutting, particularly areas that we may or may not spend, is, as noted, missions is a percentage of our budget, as is the amount that we pay in fees to ECO. It's just 1% of our budget. Well, one of the things that means is the more money we have on our budget that we don't expect to spend, the more we functionally actually just are spending. So theoretically, there's nothing preventing us from writing a budget of $1 million. The only problem with writing a budget of $1 million is that then means that we're paying ECO a $10,000 fee, because they go not based on the money that we spend, but based on the money that we budget. And so that's one of the other considerations for making cuts where possible. So as noted, we didn't foresee any capital equipment expenditures. So we really cut it down to just being able to do regular upkeep. So that when we're talking about $200, we're talking about really like we need to replace a wire and being able to do things like that. Office and pastoral care, we worked a little bit with Jenny and made cuts where possible. The probably most notable cut that you'll see is in the literature section, where we receive like the glimpses and things within the bulletin. We did cut that because that was $700. And in this time of needing to cut, that seemed to be an appropriate place. As I'm going through each section, if you have questions for the good of the congregation, I do invite you to raise your hand, and we can process through them. Yes, thank you. You will. Yep. Yep. You will receive that postcard. I don't think I said this week, but you will receive it, but not this week. That decision, ultimately needs to be made. I think it's by May, which is when we when we sign up for the Postal Service. So Jenny and I are talking about what the actual wording and default positions and stuff are. So yes, we will continue. You will receive a postcard asking about if you prefer to receive your newsletter in electronic or in paper form, and we ask that you be honest there. So if you know yourself and you say, I could receive it electronically, but honestly, if I received it electronically, I would never read it. Don't ask to receive it electronically. In that case, we really want to do what is best for all those involved. But there is a potential savings if we found that we really should just be sending it electronically. So Christian education, the Vacation Bible School cut that you see is primarily because that $3,000 was really reflective of when we were going to Mattawa, which is its own expense. Because we've held our Vacation Bible School locally, it just hasn't been as expensive, and so we made some cuts there. Music equipment, that was Worship Impact Team's statement, was they said we could cut there. We already talked about our missions giving change a little bit. Any questions with what I've said so far? No? Bob, I said any questions with what I said so far, and Bob raised his hand.
This goes back to office.
Yeah.
You got ACH fees, 0. Is that rolled into the credit card fees?
So Planning Center has a different breakdown of how they charge their fees. The credit card was very slightly higher, but the ACH, meaning an ACH is when it's coming directly out of your account, they just don't charge a percentage. And that's why the expectation, yeah. And that's why the expectation was 0, is because I think we looked at what they had charged us so far, and that was reflective.
For an SDH, it's 30 cents.
It's 30 cents per the transaction itself.
So, probably $10 for the year.
Okay. Yeah.
Question?
Yeah.
Back to the newsletter.
Yeah.
Instead of mailing it, if say I wanted a paper copy instead of digital, could I just pick up a paper copy here?
Yes.
And then it would
Yeah.
be paid?
Yeah, but that's also part of that consideration. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. For congregation members, we can print 50 plus copies. Actually, we already print copies. But yeah, we can print 50 plus copies, and you are welcome to grab it as you walk in as well. And you're right that would result in a mailing savings. Again, like, if you just really appreciate having it mailed to you, that is totally fine. We just ask you to be reflective of the practices that will work best for you. Okay. So I'd already said briefly for missions, church properties, that's one of those categories that we can't really do anything with. It just kind of is what it is. As noted, the power bill did go up, and that's just reflective of power use. And we've been trying really hard to cut down, but yeah, that just kind of is what it is.
Aaron, the churches that meet here are, if I remember correctly, are making some donations to help maybe offset some of that for the time there.
Yes, that is correct, though we are down to one church that meets with us. The Ethiopian church is currently meeting with us. The church that meets on Saturday, BNCC, either they have already moved out or they're about to move out. There's some consideration on like there being a section, a remnant of the church that stays with us, but they haven't gotten back to me on that. And then this hasn't like gone super far, but like we're also in the like very beginning stages of another church wanting to meet here. At least one, maybe 2 other churches wanting to meet here. And yes, that's definitely doing an offsetting. Yes.
I have a question about the church meeting. I can remember if we had done like a contract with them.
We did.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a contract with all of the churches that meet with us. One thing that's just like necessary to state is unless we want to like legally be in the landlord business, technically anything that a church pays is a donation. It's an offering that they're giving. So I think we're hovering around 600-ish for every month, but there's nothing Bob wants. Oh. Between the 2 churches is 1,000? Yeah. Okay. So the $400, or the Ethiopian church, which is paying an average of $400, is staying. The other church is looking at leaving. And that's because the majority of the people in their church have moved or are moving to Ohio. They were here yesterday, okay. But yeah, so we're in the process of that. I don't have anything harder to like report to you. Maybe. And as I noted, like, there's at least one other church that's really interested in meeting here, so that's not a particular dire statement, other than there might be a transition period. Yeah, miscellaneous also is something that's not terribly controllable, other than we reduce the amount of kitchen supplies that we had budgeted. And then and then we cut from discipleship and fellowship, because on average those generally haven't been used moving forward. And then one thing that some of the elders had also particularly asked was just we do a better job of tracking what expenditures are made for Easter and Trunk or Treat and Christmas program and National Night Out, and so that's why those are bracketed out as their own categories. I might be mumbling. So I said one thing that had been asked from the elders is that we do a better job of tracking what our special events expenditures look like, very particularly things like Easter, Trunk or Treat, Christmas program, and National Night Out. And that's why you see those broken out as their own particular line items. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what that tracking looks like, but we just want to make sure that that's something that we know so we can account better for it. Yes, there should be a T there. Thank you. Tim has a question, and then John.
Just under miscellaneous expenses, you have the Welcome Center budget for last year.
Yes.
You didn't spend anything, but you have a really nice Welcome Center now. How was that paid for?
I mean, it came out of it came out of the general fund, and that was a vote by session. Okay. And that was what that came out of, what kind of the Welcome Center came out of, was in reading about kind of church best practices. That was one of the things that came up is what does it look like for us to be accounting well for the visitors that God gives us? How are we actively seeking to invite them back? And that sort of nature of thing in terms of like, hey, I don't know that we are accurately reaching or actively and effectively reaching out to the visitors who come here. When we kind of made that realization or had that discussion, that was in like April. It doesn't seem particularly appropriate to say like we're not doing a good job of this and we're just going to leave it for the next 8 months and continue to reach poorly out to them. And so that was a more immediate session vote. But yeah, that's what that came out of. But we need to have a tracking mechanism for that, and so that's, yeah. Yeah. And the reason why we don't have it for next year is we don't necessarily foresee an expenditure. John and then Leanne.
So this might be obvious, and it could be a very easy yes or no. The $5,000 if we're in the hole, or if we're negative, the money that was given from the other churches just did go into our general fund. So that being $5,000 in the hole includes money that was given from those churches.
Correct. So yeah. Prorating, they put in about $12,000. Leanne. Depends on which event you're talking about, but oh, 75/20? Yeah. So I think this past year, there was a pretty strong statement related to our women's events, that it would be more or less cost-free. If we ended up with a scenario in which we really had to process through it, then we could talk about it coming out of general fund. If it were an event that costs money, that costs the church separate money, then we would need to process through that with session. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's true, that there's a limiting factor in having any congregation rent. At the same point in time, I think the kind of processing through that is that we don't want to hold so tightly to having open space that we're preventing real existent use. But that's true. The other kind of consideration, for example, what we do when session meets on like a Saturday, is a lot of the times they're not using the whole building, and so there is an ability to use a section of the building that they're not using. Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, downstairs is normally available. If there's a particular day you want to talk about, let me know. There's also just like a noise consideration, but.
Yeah, that was my point, is the noise consideration. When they bless God at these BNCC, they are perfect about it, which is wonderful. But, obviously, we want to work, but then we don't know BNCC will be here, and what our new church here, how one praise God will be like, so.
Yeah. Haley. Neither. Honestly, most of these events have generally been donation, right? So Trunk or Treat is probably our best example because it's the one that's most nailed down. For Trunk or Treat, the lights are donated to us, which is awesome and amazing. Which is awesome and amazing. Most of the candy is donated by you as a congregation, but it's also donated by the other congregations that are participating. So generally there hasn't been a high expense associated with that. One thing that I do want to continue to be at least somewhat aware of is, again, places like Star Rental has been donating the lights. There's nothing really preventing them from not. And so we really don't want to find out one year that they're just like, hey, we can't do it, and then we're like, the whole thing's off. And that's kind of the reason why there's money there, is we don't want to end up in a situation where we're just like, we've done 90% of the work and then we're out, because those circumstances have changed. We've never paid for it, so I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Any other budget-related questions? Because, that's the end of the budget. Brian?
Just stating the obvious that this is a budget, which is just a guideline. If there's anything that comes out like women's ministry or et cetera that needs to spend money for something, you just bring it to a session member, they talk about it in session, and they can adjust the budget at any time.
Yeah.
It doesn't restrict us from doing any sort of ministry throughout the year, just like the Welcome Center.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we need to spend money on this, so let's vote about it, talk about it. So.
Yep. Yes. Thank you for explicitly saying that. Both the Welcome Center and then also I think back to when we really put in the streaming computer, both of those were real and present needs that were presented, and session had to make a vote. So in a situation where it comes up.
On Trunk or Treat,
Yeah.
historically, the relationship that Robert Eaton had with his friend who had the lights,
Mm-hmm.
that's where it started.
Mm-hmm.
It was relationships and favor from the Lord, and that's where it went.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Under
roughly 30,000. Yeah, so I just wrote, we have, it's on the balance sheet, but we have over 50,000 in general fund. We have somewhere between 32 to 33,000 in the building repair fund, or in the building fund, and then we have another $15,000 in a refresh facility fund. 15. In the refresh facility fund. And those are all, if you ever want to see what our funds look like, we have a balance sheet that's just all of the funds that exist, and we can absolutely get you a copy of those. And yes, that would be in case something major happens, or we're about to talk about our old and new business. One consideration that has been just on the table since at least when we replaced the carpet, because I remember when we replaced the carpet, we had this discussion, was we replaced the carpet and we said next thing we need to do is probably the parking lot. And that was now multiple years ago. And so if we do decide to do sections of the parking lot, that's a considerable chunk. So, any other budget-related questions? No. Sweet. So as we move from this, I also want to continue to reiterate that if you ever have questions with the budget, you don't need to wait for the annual congregational meeting. It's pretty much all, at least the broad reports that session gets, I believe, are pretty much all matters of public record. And so if you ever want to know, hey, I want to know what the income expense looks like right now, how are we doing? If you want to know the balance, if you want to say, like, where did this money go, you're welcome to ask, and we can go from there. Okay. I did not have any old business that needed to be discussed. Did anyone else have any old business or that they wanted to bring up? Anything from last congregational? I have that in new business, and I will do that in just 1 second. But thank you. Any other old business questions? And then, yes, that will be my first new business question. No. Sweet. So, new business, update on the easement. I wrote a decently sized discussion of what that looks like. And is Louisa here? No. I wrote a decently sized discussion of what's happened. But as mentioned, back in September of 2021, Louisa Gauss, who is the daughter of Mrs. Vaca, Mrs. Vaca had lived in that home, and Louisa, her daughter, had come to us and said that her mother was ailing and required intensive care, a considerable amount of care. And in that space, kind of what they had figured out as the way of paying for that care was going to be to subdivide their property. So effectively, to take their yard and potentially sell that to a developer or develop themselves and build a house back there and sell that house to someone else. And so when she initially presented that before session, we had some considerations. We had some questions in terms of like what kind of the best way of doing that was. But in principle, the idea of caring for widows and orphans in their distress is very clearly something that Jesus asked his people to do. And so we were okay with it kind of in broad principle. Then the question really was, what does that like physically look like? What do the contracts look like? And so in conversation with Louisa and then also with our neighbors, the Reeds, who own, if you go down the easement, which is that back sidewalk, if you go down that sidewalk, there are the two houses that are there, and both of those houses are owned by the same neighbors. They're owned by the Reeds. And so they had a vested interest in this discussion. And so we had conversations with the Reeds and Louisa and ourselves in terms of kind of figuring that plan out. As we were talking and discussing in May of last year, unfortunately, Mrs. Vaca passed. And so that changed some of the character of the discussions a little bit. But what we ultimately came to, was they had presented a plan that would share maintenance. And then as Session looked at that plan, we realized that would, over the long term, it would result in increased costs for the church because it would be increased use and we'd be responsible for a section of the maintenance of that section. And so in seeking to kind of move that, so granting this doesn't result in an increased cost, what we had offered was effectively that the new Vaca parcel would take responsibility for that maintenance. And in order to do that and in order to make that equitable, kind of the second thing that would be needed would be for us to repave that driveway before they take over the maintenance costs. And so that is in a nutshell, and here's the summary. So reading the summary is Session's presentation to us as a congregation as the plan that seems to be most effective and most working. So Louisa is asking for access to the easement along the south of the church. In order to move forward, the church will agree to pay to repair 1/3 of the existing easement at a later date. And Louisa and our neighbors, the Reeds, agree to put money in an escrow account to cover the cost of repairs, meaning 1/3 for Louisa and 1/3 for the Reeds. And when the church parking lot is repaved or before, we will repave the easement as well. We can kind of infinitely go down details, so I guess I want to know what details people want. So any questions?
So it's going into escrow because we're not making a commitment to get the pavement done by a certain particular time.
Yeah, so initially one of the questions, in particular the Reeds, wanted us to pave it like today or June. And one of my considerations was, A, I don't know that we were ready to do that. And B, kind of out of that consideration, if we do decide to repave this parking lot, it will just be cheaper to redo them both at the same time. And the beginning estimates that we have says that most people will knock somewhere between $3,000 to $5,000 off of the cost of doing the easement if we did it the same time as we did the whole parking lot. Then it just makes more sense for us to at least consider doing it all at the same time. But then the other side of the just difficulties that you may experience with your neighbor, if you have a shared easement, is you want to get it repaved, there's a pothole that really annoys you or a crack or something that really annoys you. So I want it to be repaved, but my neighbor doesn't want it to be repaved. Or my neighbor says, this isn't a good time for me to repave it, I don't have the money right now. And so we had to kind of consider, how can we get in a situation where everyone knows that it will be repaved, where no one's going to say, oh, this isn't a good time for me, I don't have the money right now, but we don't necessarily have to do it today. And the way kind of through that was building the escrow account. One of the things that you see noted is we're asking them to a little bit future-proof the escrow account. And so what we have is we're taking the bids in terms of what it will cost, and then we're adding about 130, or it's going to be about 135% of that cost, is what we're asking people to put in an escrow account. And the reason for that is if we do find that the best time to actually have all this done is in June of 2024, it's true the asphalt costs might decrease, and that would be wonderful. They might also increase somewhat. So if they did increase somewhat, then we want to make sure that we're not responsible for paying a whole lot. One additional thing to say, though, is if it increased more than that 135%, which I don't anticipate that it would, but if it were, we are kind of committing to pay the rest other than what's in that escrow account. if it went over their overages, but that's why we built in that 35% gap. Yeah.
But according to permitting and zoning, is the lot divided for one single family house? It's not a duplex or
Correct.
more or less?
Not related to the zoning, there was some conversation in terms of like, maybe we could get the city to work with us, but the easement agreement that we are signing states that it is for one single family residence. So if they chose to build a duplex, they would be out of alignment with what we're agreeing to. Also of note, we said really explicitly that for this kind of building project, you more or less, you have to get your utilities from 56 here, right? You cannot get it from 144th and go across our property. And we said explicitly, like, that would be a new question, but like, we are just telling you no, if that's the question. Todd?
Are we going to have a comment period where?
We can, yeah. Hey, John had a question.
When we say the easement, okay, are we talking like the road all the way back to the other houses, or is it just this part by our church? Or is it gonna cut some off our worship garden out there?
No, so this, right, so the church is basically where that dot is. This is our field right here, and there's a driveway right here. That's all an existing easement. Back when the church moved here, we made an easement agreement in order to be able to get to those houses. So the easement already exists. The question really is, can the Vacas access that easement above everything else? And then there's a minor question of along this little strip right here, this little, because there's the field, then there's the driveway, the easement that we're talking about, and then there's the tiny little strip of grass. Like if they wanted along that tiny little strip of grass, if they wanted to put utility lines, could they do that also? Is the actual question related to the easement. So it shouldn't be touching our garden or our field. Also related, also in this paperwork, in the easement agreement, which is the legal document that's back there. It does state that if any damage kind of is made, that solely one party did it, one party is responsible for paying for that. That continues to be true for us as a church, but it would also be true for like the Vacas. So if as they're building, they have a dump truck and one of their dump trucks smacks into one of Joe's trucks, they would be responsible for repaying to have all of that fixed. Yes?
This is subjective. In your discussions,
Yeah.
what is the total sound?
We're a little bit the middle. What's the tone of our discussions? We're a little bit the people in the middle, in that the Reeds and Louisa don't have a particularly working relationship, but both of them have a working relationship with us. So, yeah. Any comments? Tim.
Having read the easement, it makes reference to two Reed properties, I've seen three of them.
Yeah, so this one, they own, but it doesn't need the easement. This one's unrelated to the easement, but that is where they actually live. And then they own both of these two properties. So these two properties are technically the ones that matter for...
So those are rentals?
Yes. Yeah, they rent. So if you go along the driveway, both of those two houses at the end, those are both rental properties that they rent out. So I just wrote that one because that's where our neighbors actually are. But for the legal perspective, number one doesn't matter. Dick and then Todd. No. Yep.
In our congregation, do we have enough people skilled in these kinds of, to give you input
That's true. There's been lots of learning. And definitely session members who have been on since 2021 have been involved in some sections of this discussion. We did have a lawyer look over our easement agreement. I should report to you that she thinks we're being unusually and kind of weirdly generous. So, you know, she keeps being like, you're really not charging them anything. Then like, I feel like you're pretty good. So, yeah. Todd wanted to make a comment, statement. Go for it.
While he's walking down, Aaron, the point, the document has you on there as a signer, and I'm thinking that should really be
A trustee? You're probably right. You're probably right. I was.
Could you repeat, Brian? The back of the room can't hear you. They're saying.
People talking in the back.
Just on the actual physical document of the easement, the trustee should really be the signer on it, not Aaron. Yep. I don't right now have his name on there.
Nope. You're probably correct. Yeah. It was just the pattern of the old one.
So the cost to the church for all this is zero?
No. I mean, the cost is the repaving of the easement. That's the cost, which for the easement alone, it sounds like it's going to hover around $3,000 to $4,000. Now, the relation with that is we are legally responsible for repaving the easement whether or not we do this deal. That's due to the contract that was signed back in the 1960s and reaffirmed in the 1980s. That was the decision they made. And yeah, that's what was made, and I can't relitigate it. I'm going to let Todd speak, and then I know, Eric, you have a question.
This might take a minute. When this discussion first came up, the first thing that I realized is I don't know anything about property development. And the second thing I realized is neither did anybody else in session. So we kind of relied on Tony, who is Louisa's, I think, brother-in-law, who is a land developer who's done this for a living for a very long time. But one of the first things I wanted to do was talk to people who have a history with the church, who understand the property, who could provide some wisdom in this scenario. So the first person I went and talked to was Gary Tate. And Gary, most of you know, has been here, I think, since he was a kid, right? Like for a very long time. So he was with the church when it was at the bottom of the hill and was a part of the moving up and the property and all of this. And if you've talked to Gary Tate recently, you'll notice that he's become a man of fewer words. I think Claire Tate's become a woman of more words. But as I explained this to him, Gary Tate said to me in no uncertain terms, absolutely do not let go of that easement. Gary Tate advised that we do not let go of the easement. He said, retain that easement. Do not give that right away up. And I took that on advisement, and so the next person I went to, and you know, bear in mind, at this point we're working on the backdrop of Louisa, who has a mom who is in care, and they're seeing that their money could potentially run out, and so they needed a backstop. So that's where my heart was. But Gary's very strong opinion had sway with me, so I thought I need to look further. So I went to Warner Curl, and I talked to him. And many of you know Warner has been responsible for this building and the property for many years until he moved to Montana. And in talking with Warner, he said the same thing. Absolutely do not, Todd, do not allow that easement to be given up. And he basically said, look, this is on you. You need to communicate to the church. That was a tough position to put me in because I still don't know anything about property management. Nonetheless, I took it on advisement. So I thought, you know what? Let's talk to the neighbors. Where are the neighbors on this? How do they feel? Because as much as I am concerned about Louisa and her issue, Louisa doesn't live here. Our neighbors live here, and these are the people that we are responsible to. And as it turns out, our neighbors are not excited about having a development back here. Along the way, as Pastor Aaron alluded to, unfortunately her mom passed, and this created a different dialogue. Now it became one of, in Louisa's words, maximizing profit on the property. And which I get. And in her words, if we don't do it, someone else is going to, which may or may not be the case. But so things kind of changed, things progressed, and I had to figure out what my take was on this. And my take, and with all full disclosure, I have to tell you that I am not a huge fan of this subdividing that's been going on in Tukwila. I'm a huge fan of yards that kids can play in, where they're not inside on video games. One of the things I like about Tukwila is they have yards. This is a place that's close to the city where you can buy a piece of property that has a front and backyard with trees in it. And I'm not really enjoying seeing that change occur. Nonetheless, as we moved forward in this process, there were two things, and Pastor Aaron was very clear about one of them. One of them was, if you're going to develop this property, you cannot run the utilities back through the back side of our property and back through the parking lot, which is a very real possibility or a necessity in order to actually make this work. And in that moment, in the discussion, Tony said, you know, it doesn't matter what the agreement says. We can't, if it gets to that point where we have to run the utilities through there, it's just not going to be economically viable for us. Implying that if that's the case, if it's no longer economically viable to develop the property, then it's over. And so I came back and I revisited that and I said, so are you saying that if you need to run, if we just leave verbiage on there that it's okay to run the easement through, but you find out that you can't, that you have to, and it's not going to make sense money-wise, that the project is over? He said, oh no, that's not what I said. It would just be something that we would have to revisit. And by revisit, I'm not really sure what that meant. But what it could mean is that we've just spent $100,000 developing this property, and now we find out we have to run the utilities through there. Are you really going to stop us? And if the verbiage in the contract, which I don't, is the verbiage in this contract?
Not really, because that would be a separate question.
Okay, because I don't.
Like, if they needed to run through, and I agree with you, but if they needed to run through the yard, they would need new permission, which is why I just said, like, flatly,
right.
We will tell you no.
Right. But they said, well, you know, actually don't worry about that because it's not going to make sense. And we need to have it in writing if that's the case. If we're going to move forward with this, we need to make sure that that is not an open-ended book. And I don't see it here. It's something that we would, do later. And here's the problem, because if we just said, you know what, we know that you'll restore it, you'll fix it, it'll just be fine. That extra utility running through there means that that easement that's already there goes a little wider, and I'm talking about the backside of the property. That means that our ability to put more storage, permanent storage, which we need, is going to be hindered. You can't put a permanent storage over a right-of-way through there. Maybe they need a little bit of the parking lot. I think these are some of the things that Gary and Werner were kind of alluding to. You don't know what you're giving up when you give up. It might be just an innocuous 10-foot strip of land to us right now, but you don't know because we don't know, we're not property developers, what the ramifications might be. The second area of concern was there was a lot of pushback on just one house. And I know it's in the contract, but in the discussions, the urging was, well, don't worry, once again, don't worry about the verbiage. Even if it says we can do more than one house, we actually can't do that because we've been to the city of Tukwila and they've told us no. And Tony went into great kind of detail about how they went to this department, and it's a no. Like, we couldn't do it even if we wanted to. So it's okay to have the verbiage in there. I learned, thanks to Kathy Hogarty, that right now, in this moment, the state of Washington is insisting that Tukwila change our zoning from single multifamily to, what's that?
I'll explain, I'll come up with.
Yeah, well, okay, to high density, which means you could put anything in there. And if,
A 4-story apartment and tear down the
yeah,
house.
right.
And we'd have many, many neighbors.
Right, right. And this is all good and well, but when the state of Washington has the ability to go, Tukwila, you will, I don't care if you want to or you don't want to, you will become a high-density geographic location, which our city council, thank you, is fighting against, but the hope is not high. This also doesn't hold a lot of sway, and you don't know what's going to happen. So I kind of have to fall back on the wisdom of the people who came before me and consider, what do our neighbors want? What do the people that we actually live here, what do they want? And would you like to interject, John?
I just want to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you finish with your?
Oh.
Did I distract?
No, go ahead.
I guess my question as I'm listening to you is, there's already an easement contract that exists, and if we don't give the Vacas the right to that easement as well, there's still an easement agreement. It's not going away. That exists. The Reeds, the people that live in the Reeds houses can use that driveway.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, that driveway is going to need to probably get repaired.
Mm-hmm.
There's, having read the paperwork that's here,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to share that cost with the Reeds, not the Vacas, just the Reeds.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm just curious, what's actually changing other than saying, oh, there's another party that's going to be using that easement. Because when I listen to you,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like you're concerned that we're getting rid of the easement, like we're
Mm-hmm.
selling that property.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not reading that. So
Sure.
do you mind addressing?
Yeah. So,
Clarifying that?
so-
I'm not understanding that.
as Pastor Aaron kind of pointed out, and this is our property, this is that easement that you're alluding to. This is the road, this is the way that they access. There's a little, like a 10-strip piece of grass here that is, that we own, and that the Vacas cannot use to access this property unless we say, it's okay, unless we say, this is yours now, you can come through here and develop this property. This now becomes a driveway into this existing easement. But that's really not the main concern. The main concern is what kind of development goes in there and what are the repercussions of that particular development. And to be clear, like, if we don't grant this, it's not like they can't develop the property. The property has enough room on the side of the house to put a road through. They call it a flag property. Tukwila does it all the time. And they could put a house back there. And they might be restrained to one house because of the access, or they may not. But we don't have to give up that piece in order for them to gain profit on that property. It's just that opening it up for other possibilities makes it easier for them. And not that a flag property is necessarily hard. And you're going to be asked to vote on this, and you're going to have to vote, and you're going to have to say, I'm in favor or I'm not. But I think, like, for me, the most important thing is, no matter how we vote as a church body, that's what we need to respect. So maybe I don't want that, but if we vote as a church body to allow that to go through, I'm going to respect that, and we should not allow this to be a point of division. That is the most important thing.
So John, let me clarify this. I'm talking with Gary and Warner, and they're saying don't give up that easement. Are they saying don't modify the easement to allow a driveway in there?
They're saying don't allow access so that they can develop the property.
Is that what they were implying?
Specifically, yeah. Yeah. Sure. Does anybody have a question, any question for me?
Did you talk to you, how many neighbors have you actually been able to talk with about that?
5.
And out of the five, what was the direction?
They don't want it.
Adamant?
Well, our new neighbors right across the way, Eric, they like the neighborhood. They like the feel of the neighborhood. They like the residential. I would say he's probably the least specific, but he would like it to stay the way it is. I could talk about each neighbor, but okay. Hi. That's clearly a question.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for teeing it up. So you guys know that I'm on the city council, and I also follow the state legislature really closely. I'm on a couple state boards that are following housing and what they're calling the housing crisis. You've probably heard of it. Yep, the growth management. That's exactly it. So I did want to say that the neighbor on this side over here has had conversations with us and was pretty adamant about some issues these are all unintended consequences. This is what it is. It's not that we don't want people to prosper. It's just unintended consequences that happen with land use, especially when we're not really familiar with land use. We're also not really familiar with how escalating costs of construction they can just go crazy. We saw that over the pandemic. So we have a person on this side, as I understand it, that also has some easements on his property that he has some issues with, and I don't remember exactly what those are. But those are some of the things that we're working with. But the main thing that makes me suggest that we simply don't do anything right now. And so I'm just going right to the punchline right now, okay? That's it. We don't do anything right now. And that is because, yes, the city of Tukwila has zoning areas, single-family zoning, and then there's like a medium-density zoning, which could be duplexes or something, or condos, which don't get built. You can ask me later why about that. That's another story. And then also the high density, which we see a lot of here. So there's been a lot of housing shortage, and the Growth Management Act, which is out of the county and the state have growth management acts. They're trying to mandate cities to have density and infill, and they're trying to have sanctions for cities that don't. And what happened was that happened probably about 6 years ago, and nothing was really going on as far as infill, because remember, the state doesn't build the houses. Builders build the houses, and they have to pencil out, right? And so if we're not getting any growth in housing, that's because it's not penciling out for builders. Well, meanwhile, the state legislatures think, well, we're going to try to do this differently, and instead of letting the city of Tukwila, the city of Kent, and so on and so forth, say where they want their single housing to be, we're just going to tell you, you have to have duplexes, quadplexes, and right as of now, again, I get my updates every Friday, six plexes in single family zoning. So what could happen?
Is that a mandate, Kathy?
That will be a mandate. That will be a law. We cannot, that's what we call an overreach.
It may be a law, or is it, this has been voted on, it's about to be enacted?
This is why I say let's hold off. The train is out of the station and barreling down the tracks in the state legislature. I would say, so what I'm doing as a council member, what we're doing is we're trying to scramble and do some sort of different type of legislature with our lobbyists to modify that and give us more control in the city. If the bill is written right now, just puts the hammer down and says you've got to have multifamily housing up to either 4 or 6 any place that you can build a single family within a quarter mile of a park, which everywhere is a quarter mile of a park in Tukwila. I'm pretty sure that park's a quarter mile away. And you have to, you don't have any choice. The planners in Tukwila can say all day long that you can only build a single family dwelling here, but they're not, you know, they're doing their stuff. They're not out there looking at the legislature with us, although they will be. That right now there's a little lag in the planning department because they're doing their work and we're doing ours. So the unintended consequence here could be that this could be, if it's parceled into 2 parcels, you could have 2 multifamilies, so you could have up to 12 units here. Okay, so, or 8 units. Because if it's one piece of property, somebody could subdivide it, but I do recommend that we let them do their T into it, because what happens is you've got a huge amount of traffic on this. And then another unintended, so if there is a 4-plex here, then you're going to have 4 sets of cars. And the other thing I forgot to say about this mandate is they're not going to require that you have parking on site, so you can park on the street. And that is what happens. That is what happens in churches, is that other people park in your parking lot. So then we have to talk about parking enforcement. If people park along here, you say you can't park there, but they do anyway. And knowing, having had people come up and speak in front of the council, is that it's hard to enforce parking. I mean, you could tow, but I can't tell you exactly how that works, if we just could tow people, and we don't want to be towing people, right? Towing is onerous. So that's something I don't even want to have happen. I think towing is it's just terrible. It's terrible. It makes people pay hundreds of dollars, and maybe they really didn't know they couldn't park there. But you could have people parking on each side, and then the fire trucks couldn't get through, right? So there's just all sorts of unintended consequences. So I feel like at this point, the Vaca property is something that they're doing for, it's to help them and their family. But there's a lot of risk to us, plus the escalating cost of any kind of construction, including road and pavement. And even if we have something in escrow, it's very possible it might not be adequate. So if you don't want to say no to the family, just say, let's wait and see what happens with this legislation. And then something. The property isn't going anywhere. Maybe we can inform ourselves. So maybe it would be okay. But I'm going to reinforce the fact that we don't know unintended consequences. We don't know how much parking there's going to be. We don't know how big, because a developer may want to put a 4-plex or a duplex on this property, which would actually be really great to have more density, but they could also make a T and have their own entrance there. But the other thing I think we need to know, and I can talk to the city about that, is if they need to go in with their easements this way, if we really can block them, because we think we can. But maybe maybe they can just say, too bad, we're going to go through your property. I don't know if there's some sort of mandate on that too. Yeah. No. Well, the eminent domain is for city property.
That's the government.
Yeah, and the other thing is like,
That's only government.
yeah, eminent domain, and not only that, but they have to have a.
It's for development, for housing.
They can do that.
South Seattle where I live.
Okay, so they can do that. They can say, oh yeah, and especially with this legislation coming through, there might be some rules like that we don't know what are happening, and that you have to be able to have your infrastructure has to accommodate it, and so we need to see what happens. This is what they call a long session. They've got till March, so they got a lot of time to mess around with this and pass it. And so, and I think we should see what it says before we make any decisions. Again, you don't need to say no, but I wouldn't say yes yet. This is my suggestion. Yeah.
My question, Kathy, is the legislature is working on specific rules and requirements. Is that separate from the state growth management?
No, they're all together. Yeah, it's part of the Growth Management Act. They all weave in together. Exactly.
There are lots of questions, Kathy.
Oh, okay, yes, John.
My question is not for you, Kathy.
Okay.
Thank you for saying
I think I've got you got all the facts you need from me, right? Oh, wait, there's Tim has. Oh, but I mean, yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Aaron, can we close this discussion and move for a vote, or is that what's our moving on
Point.
set point? And I'm not trying to shut people down. I'm
Yeah.
asking, like, at some point this is gonna.
Because it's almost 2.
No. At some point this is gonna end. What's the next thing that we need to do as a group?
So I think right now, with what I'm hearing, I almost want to just call for a voice vote to table this. To table this.
But I think people have questions and.
Yeah. No, so we can absolutely do that. But I think in terms of like the actual voting on the easement, at most, what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, but at most what I'm hearing is we want to table that.
I think there might be
But other people wanted. Yeah, no, that's. But.
Other things like find out if they are actually being able to bring in things through everything needs a permit. So if when you're talking about bringing in the wiring, if that is something that can even happen, that should be discovered first before they go to the planners.
Okay.
There's, like project manager, how they have
Yeah.
to figure out how things go.
That's like a sit down question because there's stuff to say related. Like basically, a lot of that planning can't happen until an easement is granted. No, like you can't find out the answer until after the easement has been granted. That's like been a whole part of this discussion. But Brian is nicely waiting to speak, and I know Tim wants to speak, and Barb wants to speak, and Haley wants to speak, and Pat wants to speak. So, Brian, go for it.
I think the wisdom that's coming up is kind of going to be a let's wait and see and before we make a vote. Because what I want to point out is what you brought up recent in this discussion regarding the Vaca property, it also applies to the Reed number 2 and number 3. They could put a sixplex for whatever on Reed 2 and Reed 3. If we don't change the easement right now, we're going to potentially be on hook for half of the easement cost in perpetuity? What's that? Perpetuate? For a long time, forever, right? Because right now our current easement, which is going to stay in place until if we don't vote for change, is that we're responsible for half of the upkeep of that.
Somewhere between 1/2 to 1/3.
Because there's 2 properties back there. So we would always be on hook for repairing that, and if they put 2 sixplexes in 2 and 3, and there's 12 houses back there, and then you've got the easement that's going to be having all that. So it's potential. If we don't know what's going to happen with the zoning, there's potential that we're still going to be on hook for ever maintaining that road for lots of parking and stuff back there. So I think
a new discussion would take place about responsibility for road upkeep if somebody wanted to put sixplexes or whatever in there.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if it changes the easement. If the government changes. Barb, you should probably use a microphone so the people online, if they're still hanging with us.
It's so much fun. I have a few questions. I don't know where Kathy went because she might have. There she went. Hi. So one question is, your object or your goal is to stop development in a multifamily. And my question is, do you think, weighing what's going on, not just at the legislature, but at the local planning level, that is going to be something under our control? And let me rephrase that. I want to amplify on that a little bit. Will the signing of this easement, which is a document providing for upkeep of this private road, that's all it is. I don't want to, I was a little concerned that we might be conflating a lot of things about what the actual question before us is today. And I'm not a property developer, so I'm asking. So I have the impression that the point was, if we don't sign the easement, we can stop multifamily development. And that's my question of you.
The main thing, I think, it's more the consequence of the Vaca property dividing into two, and then just questions about access. It might be fine. I would suggest that we make them, we don't even pay that third at the beginning, that we just suggest that they pay for everything. But yeah, so the question is really the easement. I don't know if there's ever going to be 6 plexes back there. It might not pencil out for them. But the other thing that I'm concerned about is having another property there, which actually we could have back there, would be people parking and then not being able to enforce parking. That's one of my concerns.
And having the pleasure on your behalf of sitting through many a session meeting for literally 2 years. Every meeting has had some discussion. You can trust that it has been well discussed, or discussed at length. You can trust that with the best of their judgment. And I know some other session members are here too. I don't know if they want to speak to that, but a lot of those good questions have been brought up, debated, thought about. Well, what about this or that? I just really, the only point or question I wanted is today's vote, is postponing that going to give us control over multifamily development or not? And you're saying no, it will not. Okay, that's the only point I wanted to make.
No, sorry, Tim had a question, and then Carolyn wanted to ask a question. And I think Pat did too. Okay.
Oh, you want me to use the mic? Okay. I'll use the mic. My first question was already addressed. The 2 reed lots could be redeveloped, so we're talking about a lot of more residents. Even though the new easement would say a single family resident only for each of the lots. If the legislature passes a bill that says zoning should be read thus, that easement may not have any power to say, no, you can't do it. Generally, if they build more residents in there, they're going to have to improve that easement considerably, generally. Hopefully they do it right, not like down the street where the road doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, it's the last question thing is, it sure be nice to have the 2 bills, if there's 2 bills, the House and Senate bill, so I can write a letter to representatives or senators saying, you guys are overstepping your bounds. So that's all I have.
Carolyn wanted to say something, and I think I missed the last question.
On? Yes. Okay. Hypothetical. And I appreciate Brian for bringing up the hypothetical dangers of Reed 2 and Reed 3 becoming multifamily housing areas after the Vaca property, if it gets sold and developed as multifamily property. That's going to turn our easement into a high traffic area, which was pointed out, and possibly a parking nightmare. With these hypothetical situations, why can't we hypothetically sell the easement property to the developer and let him put in the parking and maintain the paved area for the high traffic, which is once it becomes, and then it's no longer our responsibility to maintain it.
I think that's I do hear your question. That's a more involved discussion.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about actually selling property, and that's just a very different beast. Same granting access.
In the long-term future, if there's going to be a lot of high-density housing there, to have us maintain that easement, that property, is going to get very expensive.
I hear that, Stacey.
Good morning. Oh, afternoon for you, good morning for me. So, I have had the opportunity to have Amy and Isabel talking about things and hear a few things, and a couple of things that kind of irritated me, or maybe need some explanation. So, of course, it's behind here, but the easement road. The road itself is not the problem. It's this little piece of grass that's about 2 feet wide. So they can't cross it to get into their property. That's what the big discussion is all about, really. It also comes down to, yeah, maybe the Vacas wanted to take care of a financial issue with Mom. Don't know if it's true or not. I'm not there. But selling this property back here is all about money. Don't fool yourself. That's all it's about. Looking at the original diagram for the property with the house sitting here, there's enough room here to build, like Kathy said, an L-shaped access. The original easement is on this side. They built part of the house over the easement. Go figure. Screw yourself for the future. Anyway, yes, a developer could come in and buy all of this. If they do that, this may not be anything for them. They may want to put a road in over here because of how properties lay out. Again, that's all speculation. I don't want to waste people's time. My honest opinion, this is all about money. They want to make lots of it. They're not offering anything to us other than, we'll take over the easement. Well, if something changes, this easement may go away and we have more property for the church. We got more room to do things. Just saying. As far as voting for or against, oh boy. So having been involved in unions for a long time, if my union, when I used to work, came up with this at a big meeting and it was voted on tonight, probably from the president on down would be ousted. This needs to come up so we can discuss, chew on it, rediscuss, chew on it again for a couple weeks, a couple months, and then vote on it, because there's a lot of ideas out there. There's a few things brought up today that I hadn't even thought of. So I am just kind of frustrated that here it is, this huge vote. You get one meeting once a year, get it done, move on. That's what I'm going to say, but let's just do it appropriately by the proper procedures. Thank you.
Tim, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, it was just a response to your comment about selling or getting rid of these entirely. Not to open up a can of worms. This church is a non-conforming use. You go to light property and that brings that into question.
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
This property the church is on is zoned residential, not for a church. The church predates the zoning, so it is a non-conforming, allowed non-conforming use. If we don't divide the property, i.e. to get rid of the easement and give them the property in total, it would bring question of the whole use of the property.
Okay.
So it's a non-conforming use. Like we can't build an outbuilding because that's a non-conforming use. We have to go to the city council and get a special dispensation to do that.
Okay. Eric, and then I'm going to hold a postponement vote.
The church was donated, property was donated to the church for the move. Read 3 was originally the pastor's house.
Mhm.
You know, and that was sort of read 2 of the easement was there for access to the property, and that's part of the property of the church. We changed that.
Mm-hmm.
We changed the designation of the church property. We can't on all. It's residential.
Yeah. Do I have a motion to postpone vote on the easement?
Pastor, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay. Do I have a
I'd like to make a
oh.
motion to postpone the decision until after the legislation
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, one opposed. Motion carries. Do we have any other new business? No. Can I ask Jen to close us in prayer?
Have we handed in our ballots?
No.
Because we have to do the super quick trustee meeting after Jen closes.
Yeah, we have to vote for you.
Lord Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your presence, your wisdom, your discernment, your plan, your protection, your faithfulness, your clarity. Thank you for being there when we don't know what to do. Thank you that we can call on you and rely on you and rest in you. Thank you for being with us in this meeting today on all the topics, Lord. Thank you for providing our church family, our funds, our community, our gifts. We give you all the glory and all the gratitude and all the discussion and all the decisions. May we rest in your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So that concludes our actual congregational meeting. I'm going to invite Amy and Isabel up to really briefly do our trustee meeting. And on your ballot, you should have the ability to vote for your trustee.
No, it's, I can, yeah. So real quick, we'll just pray into this trustee meeting. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask for your presence. Again, we thank you, Lord, that you have been here with us and that you love us and have provided so well for this church, and that we know that we can trust you with everything. In your name, amen. We don't have them. Yep. Do you want me to read those? You can, or
Or I can hand them to you.
either way.
I'll have to find them. The annual appropriation. So is this part goes out in this book.
Okay. So the minutes from the last meeting, Elder Amy Heyer opened the meeting in prayer at 1:50 p.m. Elders present at the last meeting: me, Ed Hogarty, Todd Hutcherson, Brian Linscott. A quorum was present. Ed read the 2021 corporation meeting minutes. Motion to accept the January 30, 2021 annual corporation meeting minutes. Nick Myrick and Michael Linscott approved. Motion to elect Isabel Heyer as treasurer. Should she be elected as an elder? And Haley and Bob Ferguson passed. Motion to adjourn meeting. Bob Ferguson and John Forsyth passed. Todd Hutchison closed the corporation meeting in prayer at 1:55 p.m.
Any old business? Do we need to approve the old minutes?
Oh, yes.
I approve the minutes from the last.
Cool. They did. It's trustee, not treasurer. She misread that, but it was written correctly. Knowing my mother. Any new business? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Who are the current trustees who will be continuing in that office?
I am the current trustee. My mom is stepping out. Ed.
Ed Hogarty and Isabel Heyer are the current trustees.
Yes. Oh, so all those in favor?
Of
of approving of the minutes as written, say aye. All those opposed, say nay. Thanks, Aaron, for helping me. A motion approved. New business, specifically Donna. I can't make a motion. Okay, all those in favor say, write it on your ballot. Don't say aye. Just kidding. Any other nominations? Okay, I'm gonna close nominations. Don't need a motion for that, right?
We did do a motion for that.
Okay, does someone want to approve the motion for that? Okay.
I'm confused. I'm sorry.
Me too. But we're in this together.
I'm sorry, just to repeat.
So Haley made a motion to close nominations for trustee.
After electing Donna.
Or Donna can't have been elected. Donna can't have been elected.
Okay,
She's,
so I was
her name is just
I was
on the
hearing that, yeah.
her name is on the ballot, but she's not elected
Okay.
because we have to receive the vote.
She was nominated. Whatever.
Yeah, Donna has been nominated. Haley has moved to close nominations. Someone's going to second Haley's movement. I second.
That was Connie who seconded.
Connie seconded.
Nominations are closed. Okay. I'm going to close this in prayer. That was really stressful. Sorry, guys. Okay. Dear Lord, thank you so much for today. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts and our opinions and get all the not super fun stuff out of the way so that we can focus on serving you and leaning into you and having a closer relationship with you. Lord, thank you for this church family. Thank you that we lean so close and listen to you with all our hearts and all our minds. I pray that the rest of this week goes well for us and that it will go smoothly. In your heavenly name, amen. See you next year and next Sunday. Oh, and hand Barb your ballots.
So Danny and I are going to pick up your ballot.
And Danny.